this frequency. Hey, hey, trying to get to where I wanna go. Watch me catch this flow. I need a break from Babylon, looking for Avalon. I play the beat, grab a pen, then I travel on to places I ain't been since I had my saddle on. It's time to saddle up though, once I find my flow. There's no telling where we could go, so baby let go. I got something that I wanna show, you know. If you open up your mind, you can find your road. There's many paths, many signs to the finish line. Breaking down the status quo, it's how we get refined. How we find that deeper soul, divine. How we truly become whole, combined with humanity as a whole. We one tribe. I ain't trying to disconnect, trying to live this life. I try to live it with respect for the most high and the most low, cause we gotta balance those. Trying to find a middle ground where they both goes. Trying to get to where I wanna be. Watch me ride this frequency. Hey, hey, trying to get to where I wanna go. Watch me catch this flow.
All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us. My name is Kevin. My pronouns are he, him, and I am your Hollywood Fringe Programs Manager. I'm very excited for this workshop on anti-racism. So before we get started, we're just going to kind of go over a lot of our what's coming up and how we operate inside of our community. So let's get started. The conversations that we're going to have today can be a little bit uncomfortable, and that's okay. That's why we do this work, and we just ask that you lean in with us and be present for these incredible panelists that we have as they share our expertise. Before we get everything, let's go into some announcements. First off, this is being live streamed and it is being recorded. We just want to let everyone know, and if you're not comfortable with that, feel free to either hop off or you can just keep yourself anonymous. At any point during this panel, if you need to take a break, feel free to do so. Grab coffee, get a drink of water or anything. Do whatever you need to do. This space is it's for you to learn and grow. Please rename yourself on the Zoom with your first name and your pronouns if you haven't already. We've started that practice of adding our pronouns into Zoom so that everybody can feel safe, supportive, and free to be themselves. Before we begin, we'd like to do a land acknowledgement, which is a formal statement that recognizes and honors the Indigenous peoples of the land that we currently preside and work on. The Hollywood Fringe acknowledges that we are on the unceded lands of the Tongva, Quiche, Gabrielenos, and Gabrielenos lands. Our statement serves as a practice as we commit to furthering our connection to the Indigenous communities, both past, present, and emerging. If you have any accessibility needs that aren't being met, don't hesitate to reach out to any one of our staff members here on the Zoom. If you hover over the names, you can see that we have Stina here and Carly here. They will be able to both answer any questions. If you have any questions during this Zoom that you would like to just ask via, anonymously, you can email them, message them, and they'll respond to you. And we'll also have an anonymous Google Drive form that you can also submit it if you don't want to have your name attached to a question, because sometimes these topics can be hard and we aren't sure what the right answer is and we don't want to hurt anybody. So we want to give that option to everybody. As well as if you ever need any access or support, please don't hesitate to reach out to us via email. You can email us at support@hollywoodfringe.org. And we will give you accommodations. If you give us 72 hours in advance, we can do anything for you. But of course, don't feel free to reach out at any time. All right, cool. So now have fun, and we're all learning how to do all of this stuff virtually alongside of you. If you have any technical issues, they come up, just DM one of us and we'll be able to support you through all of this stuff. Cool. Now let's jump into, I'm going to do this really, really fast so that we can get to this awesome panel. Upcoming workshops, town halls, events, etc. We have tons of educational and networking events this year, all scheduled and lined up to have a great, successful Fringe. We advise that you come to as many as you possibly can. You don't have to be present at all of them because they'll all be put on our YouTube and they'll be on our Facebook as they are all streamed to Facebook, so you can find them there. Our town halls are hybrid, in-person and live stream on YouTube, recorded as well. These are informational sessions where our co-directors, Ellen and Lois, will talk about everything that you need to know to do Fringe. So make sure that you come to our town halls so that you can get information about registrations, ticketing, how to have the best experience, all of those things. And then our workshops and panels are all on Zoom and Facebook Live, except for the Festival Expectations one, where you'll get all of the information download right before the festival. The workshops and panels are great because they are sessions with Fringe veterans who have been doing this for, some of them, 10 years or more, and they have the real download on how to have a good Fringe. We recommend that you come and check out our town halls that are coming up, as well as the ones that are in past. Be sure to check them out on our YouTube. Upcoming workshops we have is the immersive panel with No Proscenium, the No Proscenium organization. They are a massive global immersive theater like extraordinaire. They're so cool. That is actually tomorrow, so tune back in if you're interested in doing any immersive theater at the Fringe. Then following that, we have our accessibility at Fringe workshop, then our marketing and ticketing workshop, and how to tech your Fringe show and festival expectations. All of these can be found in our events blog that has just been dropped into the chat. So they'll be there, they live there eternally. So check those things out. And the past one, we did a web session, how to navigate the Fringe website during the festival. That's a really great one if you are looking to jump in and start producing at Fringe. It's going to show you how to do all of the registration, set ticketing, everything that you could possibly need. And then upcoming in May, we'll have another one, virtual session where we'll go deeper into how to manage your ticket sales during Fringe, what to do about press and how to manage them inside of your Fringe page, industry comps, how to message people like your patrons who are coming, as well as managing your will call list for the day of show and leading up to show. Additionally, please sign up for our newsletter. We'll have networking opportunities and other events beginning in March. Get on our list so that you can know when those things are coming. You'll automatically be added to this once you register as a participant into the festival. So if you're already registered with a project, don't worry, you're already signed up. If you're not, feel free to jump over to our website and we can get that going for you. If you are new to the Fringe community and want to learn more about participation, check out the Artist Resources tab on the top right corner of our website, and you can also email support@hollywoodfringe.org. Now, let's go on to some dates that are coming up or have passed that will be important for you to drill into your brain as you start to consider and move into producing a Fringe. So registration opened up on February 1st. It's going to stay open until like the dead end of May when you can register your project. However, on April 1st, that's the registration deadline to be added into our guidebook listing. And so that'll mean that your show will be inside of the listing for everybody to be able to see. So make sure if you plan on participating as a show inside of the Hollywood Fringe Festival, that you get on that registration deadline of April 1st so that people will be able to see your show when it goes out. And then on April 10th, that's going to be the guide ads deadline. So if you want to put an ad for your show inside of the guidebook for the Hollywood Fringe Festival, make sure that you have that submitted by April 10th. Now, this is my favorite one because it's just the best. It makes it feel like, oh, we're here. May 1st, tickets go on sale for the Hollywood Fringe Festival. And it's a really exciting time because then you get to start actually seeing some of the people that are going to come to your show, and you'll be at office hours. It'll be really, really great. June 1st through the 6th is the Hollywood Fringe previews. So when you're doing a show, that's kind of like preview night to invite press and to start to expose your show to our Fringe audience that is just built in based off of our participants and the large community of people in Hollywood who just love the Hollywood Fringe Festival. Then June 7th, that is going to be our opening night party. There will be no shows that day. It's a giant celebration to just come in and celebrate theater with a bunch of people who love the theater. June 8th through the 25th is the run of the Hollywood Fringe Festival. It is a massive undertaking. It's so fun, so much energy. And the June 25th is the awards ceremony and closing nights. Okay, lots of stuff to remember, but we have our newsletter that will keep you updated on all of these things, as well as all of these resources are in our events and scheduling blogs on our website. Now let's move on a little bit and talk about the Fringe Code of Conduct. At the Fringe, we don't have a lot of rules, but we do take our code of conduct very seriously. If you register a project, you and your team will be held accountable for the actions as you participate within our festival, both of you individually and the actions of your cast, crew, and other participants working with your project. Everyone should just be professional and keep the environment professional so that we can all take part in a really, really safe and inclusive environment. This festival is built on freedom of expression and a lack of censorship, which means we must maintain the utmost respect for one another and create a safe place for people to take risks in their work. We don't censor anybody's words unless they cause active harm or use hateful speech or any actions against protected groups. For example, women, people of color, queer and trans folks, disabled folks, capital D and deaf folks, fat folks, and religious folks, just to name a few. There are limits to this uncensored nature, however, and that limit is often set by our Access Committee, which is enforced by our Access Committee and our staff. So make sure if you're reached out to, you listen and work together to resolve any issues. We don't have to do it often, but an example would be, if somebody is doing a show that includes a racial epithet that is not appropriate, then we're gonna come in and make sure that's not a part of our community. We have a very diverse community, one that often has more women and non-binary people producing than men, and we attempt to foster a community where everyone is being gendered in the way that they choose to, and we want to make sure that we're creating that safe environment. We're on the path to making this fringe more accessible space. This sometimes means people may use disability-related terms that you're not yet familiar with, or there might be an interpreter that may block a view of panelists, say in like a Zoom panel. We encourage you to use that as a learning opportunity, Google the terms, move seats, or just engage and understand that sometimes it's okay. It's gonna be all right. We appreciate the privilege you have to not face the oppressions or limitations in environments that others do. We are a space that is committed to anti-racism, not only through words, but through our actions. In many environments, people face microaggressions and racism on a daily basis. At Fringe, we actively work to keep these behaviors out of our spaces. We are radically aware of this and try to engage folks in conflict resolution when mistakes are made. And that part's really important, is when mistakes are made, we just own them, learn from them, and move on. And we do that at Fringe as well. We're not perfect. We make mistakes, we learn, and we grow. We are fiercely protective of our community and our ethos and reserve the right to ask anyone to leave or take a break from our space at any time. This isn't to scare anyone, but to encourage you to take this path with us. This is also a promise to those in the room that face these issues outside this community that we will actively work with you to make sure these issues are handled. We strive to have a wholly inclusive environment and invite you to come with us on this journey to create a supportive space. We invite you to share with this ethos and our code of conduct with our team, as you will be asked to uphold this ethos as you participate. So thank you for joining us and creating the LA theater scene that we all desperately want, need, and are going to create. All right, cool. Sweet, I think that's about it. Now, before we really get started with our panelists, here's how to engage with the Hollywood Fringe Festival marketing. We touched on it a little bit earlier. Make sure that you're signed up for our newsletter, for the emails, follow us on social media, TikTok, Instagram, and like us on Facebook at Hollywood Fringe across all of our platforms. When you are posting about your time at the Hollywood Fringe and how much fun you're having, use the hashtag hashtag HFF23. I just kind of see an acronym and read it. And then, of course, you can always email support@hollywoodfringe.org with any questions as you move along. Now, before I toss it over to our panelists, by show of raised hands, who is new to the Hollywood Fringe Festival? Y'all can do it on here, or we can, anyone who's new? Anyone? All right, cool. Lots of new people. Cool. I think that's about it. So let's go ahead and get started. Panelists, if you may, come join us on the screen, and we'll just introduce you real fast. Oh, I love these people. Awesome. I think we'll get Royce. Yeah, there we go. Okay. Hello, everybody. This is Royce, Camila, and Natasha. They are incredible human beings who I have the wonderful pleasure of knowing with a wealth of knowledge and insight. Why don't we start with introducing yourselves? I'll just kind of go in the order that I see you on my screen. Camila, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, of course. My name is Camila. My pronouns are she, they. I am currently, I think, can you hear me? Sorry, the Wi-Fi is going crazy. Awesome. I have two curly fringes framing my face. I'm wearing some really nice, cheap earrings, as I prefer my earrings to be nice and cheap. I'm wearing a brown blouse with some kind of like wavy designs on it. It looks like sea waves, but in brown. And I am so happy to be here and speak about this really important, complicated, crucial matter.
Thank you, Camila. I just realized I forgot to give my visual description, so I'll do it now. I am Kevin Neighbors. I am the person that has been talking. Maybe you know my voice. And I am a light-skinned white man with an afro sort of fade thing going on, a nice beard that's been coming in, and I'm wearing a black t-shirt and a blurred sort of beige-ish background. Royce, I see you next time.
Hey everyone, my name is Royce. My pronouns are he, him. I'm a black man, curly hair, wearing a black t-shirt, just a wall of random pictures behind me. Happy to be here, and and talk and answer questions about the subject. I'm on the Access Committee as well as the Scholarship Committee for Fringe, and I have been a part of the festival for, well, I guess if I'm counting pandemic times, 6 years. I don't know time anymore, so it's been a
Same. We all go. I just turned 30, and I'm like, nah, bro. I'm 28 still, because time doesn't matter at that point, right? I still get to have my 20s. All right, Natasha. Okay, no worries. We're all here. Things happen. Natasha, I see you up next.
Hello, my name is Natasha Lewin. I am a light-skinned woman with a gray cap on, knit cap to keep my head warm, bleached blonde hair, a warm red sweater. I'm in front of an 80s VHS collection. I'm also on the diversity scholarship team with Royce, as well as the Access Committee, and I've been involved with Fringe since 2017, and I'm super glad to be here and meet all of y'all.
Wonderful. Awesome. So let's get started. I just want to give a special shout out to our wonderful Chris Farah, who is on this call with us. They are an incredible human being who does so much amazing work. They were on the ground floor of creating the scholarship program, and we are so happy to have you here. As we know, they're coming back from this wonderful world of theater, and it's great to have you here. Thank you for joining us. Now let's talk about some communication parameters. This work can be difficult, and it's okay. None of us have all of the answers, and we encourage everyone to engage in it. And if you make mistakes, it's okay. We just own them, and we work and we learn. So in conversations and spaces like this, and just in our world in general, as we move into the Hollywood Fringe Festival and other theater spaces, we're change makers. So let's embrace the fact that we're always changing and growing, and that means that we speak in draft. So when we're talking, we acknowledge that, hey, I don't have all of the answers right now, or I'm an anxious mess like 80% of the time. So I might stumble in my words and they might not be perfect. And acknowledging that allows us to have a better, more full conversation, so that we can learn, grow, and communicate with each other. And then when we do make mistakes, we respect each other. We don't harm each other. Harming somebody intentionally is not a mistake, and that is not included in speaking in draft. And we'll kind of get into that a little bit more. I'd like to add that there are no dumb questions when it comes to this kind of work. We live in a world that centers whiteness and cisness over anything else. And so sometimes that programming that we receive doesn't allow us to look at the world in a broader spectrum. And so there are no dumb questions. There are only hurtful questions. So we ask that you please ask whatever questions you have, and try and do so in a way that you feel is supportive of the people that you're asking the questions to. We ask that you also only speak from your experience, not the experience of people that you know. For instance, if Kevin has a friend, and Kevin is mixed Black, and he's talked about his experience, and you're having a conversation about anything at all, don't pull from my experience to validate a conversation that you're having with someone else. Only speak from the experience that you have personally, and ask questions. We've also, I believe it's already been dropped in the chat, but we'll go ahead and drop it in again. We have an anonymous form that you can submit questions to. Your identity will be kept completely anonymous, and it's a way for you to engage with the Hollywood Fringe Festival, our Access Committee, and other people who are our partners to help us create a more supportive environment. You can always ask questions there, and your name will always be kept out, and your identity will be anonymous, and it helps us continue to grow and learn together. So feel free to drop any questions in there. Again, during this time, because it can be a bit of a uncomfortable conversation sometimes, you can always DM either Stina or Carly, and they will be happy to answer any questions or pass on the question to me so that I can answer it on the open forum. And there's Stina, and Carly's the tech wizard behind the scenes, so you won't see them. Whoa, I just got spotlighted. Cool. All righty, there we go. Thank you. Let's see. Cool. So without further ado, let's kind of just preface with what is hold on. Let me my link went away. I'm going to go ahead and open this up again so I can talk to you about it. All right, there we go. Well, let's talk about what is white supremacy culture, right? Because there's this big thing like, oh, be anti-racist, and it can be uncomfortable and it can be a little scary. And what anti-racism really comes down to is it comes down to dismantling white supremacy culture. And white supremacy culture is a massive part of the United States of America's culture. And it has, there's this wonderful document created by dismantling racism.org called the White Supremacy Culture. We'll go ahead and share a link with you in the chat so that you can view it with us. But we're not going to read the whole thing. We're just kind of going to touch on it so that we can briefly define what these things are and what white supremacy culture is on the surface level, because we wish we could dismantle it all today, but we can't. And so it's all about engaging step by step and continuing to learn and think about things in a different perspective. So we'll kind of first jump in and we'll go through them, and then we'll talk about them a little bit and then move on into how all of this is applied to the theater. So the first characteristic of white supremacy culture is perfectionism. And that is that people have little appreciation expressed among people for the work that others are doing, appreciation that is expressed usually directed to those who get the most credit anyway. More common it is that people view that their work is inadequate unless it reaches a certain point that is defined by somebody of power, somebody with a concept within our culture. I think we're all familiar with this, where it's like, me, and I'll always use myself as an example when talking about these things, is that like, oh, hey, if I don't turn this paper in and it's not exactly perfect, if I missed a period, then that means that my work is discredited and no longer valuable because I made a mistake here. And it's tied to so many things that are designed to bring people down. It's tied to literacy, right? If I don't speak perfectly, then my opinions, scholastic, academic, whatever, expertise is invalid if I'm not speaking in a certain way. A sense of urgency. This one's interesting, and I think it's really important because it asks us to move quickly in our society. We have to constantly be in motion. When we came into 2020 and we were having conversations about racism and police brutality, everybody was so quick to jump on and have an answer, to put out a statement, when really what needs to happen is we need to slow down and look around and say, what's going on? How can we best serve our communities, and have a conversation? And so that sense of urgency detracts from our ability to actually make change or do anything in our own lives, because we have to act quickly. The next one is defensiveness. This is when we make a mistake and we are, we feel hurt, so we push back on something instead of listening and figuring out, hey, why did this happen? Why has somebody been hurt? Or what is the impact of my mistake? And how can I avoid that in the future? And so defensiveness is, if somebody, says something like, Kevin, racially about my hair or my skin or whatever, and then I say, hey, that hurt my feelings. And they say, oh, I didn't mean to. We say, oh, I didn't mean to, and I'm sorry. How can I better communicate with you later, versus saying, I'm not a racist, I'm not this, I'm not that, because that just can perpetuate more harm. And all of these things really tie back to how we live our lives, because these tenets aren't about just racism, they're embedded into our culture and our being. So when I make a mistake at work, being like, oh, well, if they had given me this first and I had done that, then I wouldn't have had made this mistake in the first place. That stalls progress in every component of our life. Same with perfectionism and the sense of urgency. So these things are pervasive through our whole lives. And when you start to acknowledge where these things are coming from, you realize that they don't belong to you. They're part of our culture that was programmed and taught to you. And when you can start to take those things away, then you start to open up your mind and open up your ability to function at a higher level and be more inclusive and supportive of all people. Another one is quantity over quality. It denotes that we have to have lots and lots and lots of things for it to be good, right? It's tied to capitalism in America. It's tied to, if more people follow me on Instagram, then that means I'm legit. Whereas sometimes just having good quality conversations and content is fantastic. An example would be I was at a festival this last week doing anti-racism work, and people were like, well, we only have 6 faculty members out of the 100 people who are here. And I'm like, yeah, but these faculty members, we're gonna have a really great conversation, and then they have the opportunity to go spread that. So we didn't think because we don't have everybody here, our work is no longer valid. No, it still is, and we can still do the work. It's about how well we do the work. It's about how well we engage, right? And that goes for theater as well, right? Like, what if we don't sell at a house? We had 10 people. Well, that's 10 people who saw your story. Maybe it was a more intimate performance, and that's great because now you're having an even more good, I don't use words perfectly, but like a more good connection to them, and you can spread your message and how you perceive the world. And those people will go and talk about it, right? So quantity over quality, that's capitalism, right? The worship of the written word. This one's very interesting, and it's really pervasive in our society. If it's not in a memo, then it doesn't exist. A great example, and I like to add video onto this as well. If it's not recorded in video or recorded with a voice, it's not valid. It devalues people's experiences. It devalues the truth when it's like he said, she said kind of situation, and it stops people from having accountability, right? So if something happened and it wasn't written down or wasn't recorded, then one person can say, well, that didn't happen. And it stops us from having to be like, hey, yeah, you know what, I did do that and I am sorry. It was a big part of like the Me Too movement, was a lot of worship of the written word, and how lack of quote unquote evidence means that something isn't legitimate. The next one is there's only one right way, the belief that there's one way to do things, and if it's not done this way, then it's incorrect. And this is an advocacy work as well. There's so many ways to support and advocate for other people. There's not one right way. And in the workplace, I think we can all understand how this one works, where it's like, you got your micromanager who says if you don't do it this way, then it's not perfect. And an example, and we'll tie this one back to racism a little bit. It's like, hey, so if we don't speak this way, then it's wrong. If we don't come and go through the process of getting into college this way, then we're not going to get accepted. A great example of how this has kind of been taken away is Harvard and I believe Yale both just eliminated the SAT and ACTs from their requirements to be admitted into their schools. And so now there's more ways to get into Harvard and Yale. And so having more pathways open is a great way to start to take down anti-racism. A great way would be casting too. There's when you're casting and people like slate, some people want a rigid slate, some people want like a loose slate, right? So how can you make sure that you're allowing people different ways to do things? Paternalism is directly tied to think like patriarchy. It's decision-making where the decision-making is clear to those with power and unclear to those without it, but the people without it can see the effects of the decisions that are being made in their own lives. And so making sure that there's transparency in what you're doing, that you're having open dialogue, open communication, and acknowledging that you don't know as an individual the best choices for a large group of people without communication, right? This one is perhaps biasly one of my favorite. I think either or thinking is extremely important because it's you either, example would be like within our mixed communities. It's like you are either Black or white, you can't be both. And if you are both, it becomes complex and we can't wrap our head around what that is. It's pervasive and like, it's like perfectionism. It's kind of close to that, where you have, if you don't do it this way, then it's wrong, right? And so continuing to remove these types of thoughts out of our dialogue that we have with ourselves. Another example would be like in acting, right? If you didn't study at this school, or if you don't use this method, then it's incorrect, right? If you're not doing this with your lighting and sound, then it's incorrect. And that's just not true. And obviously it goes into race, where it's like, hey, you either do things this way, or it's wrong. Power hoarding, this one is pervasive, obviously, in the US. It's about transparency, sharing power, allowing people to join your decision-making processes, collaboration. And we see this all the time in corporations, and especially in large theater organizations, where to get into the game. You have to schmooze and moose your way through everything instead of having people share power across decision making. Another one is fear of open conflict. This one is a great example. It's kind of what we're talking about here this morning already. Or, whoa, it's the afternoon. It's what we're talking about this afternoon already, where, you know, why do we have this Google form? It's because in our culture, it can be scary and uncomfortable to open up a discussion that causes conflict. But when we start to look at all of these different characteristics that we're talking about, we start to be able to see, oh, hey, look, we can have these discussions when we stop thinking of things in the forms of perfectionism. Either we're thinking this or that. And then we're almost wrapped up here with them. We have individualism, that people working individually is the best way to go. So I'm going to sit in my cubicle and I'm going to work by myself and it's going to be great. But then that also stops people from having accountability. So that's like CCing people on emails, that's making sure that there's open communication and that we're all collaborating together all the time, so that things can't happen in the dark and then you're not responsible for, you won't be responsible for a mistake that's made alone, because you'll have people along the way to even help you not make mistakes, right? I'm the only one, if I can't do it, then nobody can concepts, or, you know, I'm going to do this and only I can do this, right? Everything, this is connected to individualism because we have to do everything together, right? And then progress is bigger and more, if it's better if it's bigger and more, and that's just not true. It's connected to quality over quantity. So make sure, you know, as we're thinking about things, is if I have like this why big audience or this why big this, does it make it better? Not necessarily. Objectivity, this means like the right to feel like you have everything neutral, right? Like I'm a neutral person, I have no bias. That's just not true. We don't have that, right? And it's okay to acknowledge that, hey, I'm biased towards this or I'm biased towards that, and seek other people out to help you balance out your biases. And again, that goes back to the individualism, and it goes back to the community and collaboration as a way to sort of program our brains from living this white supremacy culture. And then I know it's a lot of these things, so we're almost done now. Finally, we have the right to comfort, and this one's a really good one. So the belief that those with power have a right to emotional and psychological comfort, scapegoating those who cause discomfort, and equating individual acts of unfairness against white people with systemic racism, which daily targets people of color. So this one's all about like me as a mixed person. Like I have this, right? I don't have a right to always feel comfortable, because if I hurt somebody and I make a mistake, I don't have a right to feel comfortable. I need to I don't need to comfort anybody, but I need to make sure that I'm holding myself accountable and leaving space, right? So people, it's like it's like the Karen stuff, you know, it's like, I have a right to be in this space and feel comfortable and heard and whatever. It's like, yeah, but you're causing active harm, right? So that takes us through all of the characteristics. We have that doc, if we don't mind, there's been a couple of comments, just kind of dropping it in there again. We went really brief over it. We didn't even dive into this past the surface. So please take a look at it and start to think about how these things affect your personal lives. And one of the things that is so amazing about them is they affect white people as well as they affect people of color, because we're programmed just as well. It's about economic status. It's about white supremacy culture is the same culture and same tactics that are utilized to keep down LGBTQIA plus communities, religious communities. And when you start to look at it, it sort of frees you up and goes like, oh man, I don't have to be perfect. That's a great example. This is wonderful. I can live my life. And the roots of white supremacy, I mean, they go back hundreds and hundreds of years, going to, you know, colonial times, to the British before, I'm going to speak in draft here, but like before they, you know, before America was even here. It goes all the way that far back, starting with, you know, the royalty systems and monarchies. So it's ingrained into our culture, and we have adopted it, and it's time that we do away with it. And the modern effects are, you know, it's what creates our economic imbalance. If you don't have a college degree, then you can't get to here. If you don't have money, then you can't get to here. If you don't speak properly, then you can't go here. And it doesn't just affect people of color, but it affects people of color the most, because of how it's designed, right? So let's just engage in that work. So let's jump right in. We can talk about it. Did anyone on our panel hear any of those and go like, yeah, this is my one that really speaks to me?
I don't know. I mean, they all speak to me, and I can so recognize how they are big pillars. It's so interesting that a lot of those pillars are shared under capitalism, especially like this urgency to produce labor, um, and like this kind of like ingrained defensiveness we have that capitalism is kind of the only way. I feel like a lot of white supremacists and white supremacist institutions kind of just believe that that is the only way, you know. And it's so interesting to see how many of these structures are kind of married to one another, and there is no divorcing them from one another. And I thought that was really interesting. A lot of the pillars resonated in a sort of capitalist structure for me.
Yeah, especially since capitalism is driven from slavery, right? Cheap labor and exploitation. Yeah. Anyone else have anything to add before we jump into how this all applies to our theater practice? Perfect. Let's just dive right in then. Let's talk about casting, because that's a really big one. And y'all, this is an informal conversation. So yeah, it's an informal conversation. So let's just, if you have something to say, unmute yourself and just chime in. So when we think about anti-racism and casting, like how do y'all make sure that you are casting anti-racismly inside of your productions that you do or inside of the work that you do?
I can start on this. I mean, I think with casting, part of that, it has to, some of that work has to begin even before you even think about casting people. It has to do with the content that is actually written for the show. So if you're writing a part, it's important to try to think about it in writing. Okay, does it matter what gender plays this particular role? Does it matter what background this particular role needs to have? If the answer to both of those is no, then this means you can literally be casting anyone, like you're casting the best person for a role, and you're not restricting it to like, oh no, well, this has to be a white person because of so and so, or this has to be a black person because of so and so. Like that's really the only time that it should be that you should have, like, I guess, restrictions on it. Like if you're writing a play about a trans black woman, don't cast a straight white woman to play it. Like some of those things which would seem to be common sense sometimes, doesn't always come off that way. But a lot of it, yeah, it starts with the content and of just what the show is that you're doing, like. Yeah. And then to be able to look at something and say, okay, does this role, does it have to be played by a male? No, not really. It actually doesn't matter. All right, great. I'm going to cast whoever. I'm going to open up the pool to choose from, because unfortunately, still a lot of talent does get overlooked because maybe they don't fit the preconceived notion of what you thought you saw when you were writing this particular play or the show or whatever, when in reality, like, it shouldn't matter unless, like, say, oh, okay, I'm casting someone to play, say, Rosa Parks. Well, if there's a play about Rosa Parks, I shouldn't look up and see someone that's not black playing Rosa Parks, because like it's like a real person. So yeah, that's my 2 cents with that so far.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because there was just a Latinx collective that was doing the Diary of Anne Frank from their perspective with, basically the play itself. And so someone could look at that and say, well, the Diary of Anne Frank, she wasn't, of Latin descent. She wasn't she was Dutch Jewish woman or girl. And it was great. It was a great play. So, is artist interpretation. And I think that's what's wonderful about theater. And I was just at brunch with some girlfriends of mine, and I was having this conversation because I knew I was going to be on this panel, and another woman of color I was telling her about colorblind casting. She's involved in the film aspect of production, and was saying, I kind of have a issue with it, because if I'm seeing someone who if I'm seeing on a film or wherever, I'm seeing someone who is one race and then the parents are two other races, and they never discuss how this came to be, or why they don't look alike. The discussion of adoption never came up, whatever. She's like, I feel like that to me is like so confusing, and then I'm wrapping my brain around it, and I'm missing what the show's about. And I thought it was a really valid point that I hadn't really thought about. So, I mean, like Royce said, I think that it's something that the producer, the director, the creator, the writer really has to put some thought into, because you want to make sure that you don't token anybody, that you're not just putting diverse characters in your cast just to have diverse characters, like to just kind of have the rainbow. While that's all great, there is, an authenticity, inauthentic way of having a show that's, you can tell that people are just token characters. And then on the flip side, like my friend was saying, like she pointed out, is if you do have colorblind casting, which is essentially you're getting the best actor. It doesn't matter where they come from, what their ethnicity is, what their race, creed, color, anything, background is. You just want the best actor for that role. Be confusing to the audience, and it's something that you really have to think about with your show. So there's a lot of elements that go in that, which is really great that we're having this discussion, and that I had that discussion after this morning. And I'm just curious to talk to my fellow panelists about it.
I'd say too, with that, like there's colorblind casting and there's color conscious casting, which is this new terminology that we're starting to use a little bit too, where I shot a film about 4 years ago, and it was an all black crew except for the cinematographer, and we were getting ready to cast, and they wanted to cast it was about women being oppressed by men, and they cast everybody as a black male except for the husband of the wife, and the only person that doesn't abuse anybody. And I stopped and I said, wait a minute. And it was color, it was black folk. Like we were all in this room together. And I was like, but we have to consider what message are we giving when we do this? We are giving these people opportunity, and it's fantastic. And we're talking about our issues inside of our own community, but when we cast this way, we're going to be doing harm unintentionally, right? And so with that, knowing when we're doing colorblind, color conscious casting, and whoever's best for the role, start to consider like where in that role might there be an issue where, hey, this person is constantly being harmed in the play. And if it's if all of your people who are of color are those characters, well, then that can become a line that can be harmful to the audience and to our communities. And so it's about expanding our mind and saying, hey, like what happens to these characters in this play? What would be the connection point or the fallout, right? And I don't like the word fallout, but again, we're talking a draft of casting a person of color or a trans person, even, because these things are interconnected in this role.
I think I'm thinking about what you said, Natasha, about what your friend said when it comes, if you're watching a production and it's a multi-ethnic family unit and the topic of adoption is never addressed, or the topic of a queer chosen family isn't addressed. I guess, we are used to, and we are expected as an audience to suspend our disbelief when entering the theater. And I guess I wonder, where's the difficulty in suspending your disbelief that this is a family that happened this way? Because if you're watching a production and it's difficult to wrap your mind around a multi-ethnic household, is it, where is the, I guess, like where does the issue lie? Is it a poor production? Is it, and I don't mean poor economically, a bad production, that it's sort of the focus is off balance? Or if it's a really incredible production and you're still thinking about like, it's great, but why is there a multi-ethnic household in this? Then that is, I guess that, I don't know, that I don't know what question I'm asking. I just know that I'm asking a question.
I love that you're saying that. because it kind of relates back to like the right to comfort, right? And me in this audience and asking for comfort and like, how did this come to be? Whereas like that's like if you did my story of my family when I was adopted by white people, I'm like, why does Kevin and Victor look so different? But we never addressed that I was adopted because that's not what the story's about. The truth still
Yeah.
is. It's very interesting, yeah. And that's why
Yeah.
it's Natasha, sorry to cut you off a little bit.
Oh no, I mean, I thought that's what, especially from a woman of color, hearing this,
Yeah.
perspective of hers. So, I think a lot of it, and this goes back to the white supremacy, really has to do with generational trauma and what we've learned, that we have to unlearn. And I agree. I said suspension of disbelief. That was the first thing I said. And she was having a hard time really wrapping her mind around it. And I don't want to falter for anything because her feeling is absolutely valid. But it is something that just came up at perfect timing to be able to discuss this. Maybe it's something that the creator, Fringe is such a wonderful place where you can really you can basically, as long as you're not hurting anybody, you're not being a jerk, you can really have these conversations. So maybe it's something for the creator when they really do this color conscious casting to be able to have a talk back with their audience, to be able to discuss something that wasn't, why did they choose this? I would like, to see more of that, hear more of it. So I think this is a really awesome opportunity of something that really kind of enlightened my mind, as, the Jewish people say, a Talmud, because before I was like very much into color conscious and colorblind casting. And now I was like, wow, that's really interesting. This is the first time I've heard this perspective. So.
Yeah. I love that. That's and that's where it comes to the point where it's like, hey, these things, there's no right and wrong answer. And every situation, every show has different needs of application for casting, because every show is different, right? And we're talking, if I think, it's so cool how we can start to just engage in conversation and realize that some situations would call for it. I would argue your friend that you're talking about, Natasha, there are shows where it's like, hey, now this is becoming kind of oppressive because they're ignoring the fact and they're trying to pretend that we're all the same. And that's not the case at all. But then in a case where the story, maybe is a semblance of a story like mine, then it's actually an act of justice, right? Because it's like, hey, my family doesn't owe you an explanation, right? And so it starts to become about the content of the show. I think this is such a great conversation. Let's go on to kind of like a two-parter question here. So how do you implement anti-racism into casting? I know we've kind of discussed it a little bit, but let's talk a little bit about the language. So, as you start to go in and you're looking at casting and you're getting ready to start the process, what sort of components and practices do you go in using to ensure that you're staying true to the pre-work that you've done, sort of marking your script and thinking about all of these things? And then in addition to it, is there any language that you find helpful?
I want to echo what Royce started off saying, that the process begins before casting. I think when we see a script and it lends itself to having an ensemble of people from marginalized communities, be it communities of color or immigrant communities, queer communities, disabled communities, communities with disability, all of those, I think we sort of owe it to ourselves to become a little more cutthroat with, I guess maybe it's a poor word, but with the content that we are coming across, really inspecting the script or the story that is being sold. Because I think there's a lot of scripts, I read primarily when I was at UCLA that were Latino scripts about immigrant families. And while that is so exciting to have that content, a deeper look into the script revealed terrible machismo and colorism and sexism, and not in a way that is exposing this in our community, because there is a terrible anti-Blackness in the Latino communities and xenophobia within our own immigrant communities. But the script was not an expose of that. It was kind of thriving off of these notions. And I'm not sure I mean, if it's like, a study of critical race theory, or like, I mean, that's such a big, scary term right now, unfortunately. But I think it stems in really getting a script and understanding that just because it's checking off these sort of boxes of diversity, that the content itself is harmful, And so, yeah, you could be casting a show with an incredibly diverse ensemble, but the content that is being produced and absorbed by the audience can be harmful and can sort of perpetuate these kinds of ideas. And I think it starts there, and then obviously having a team of diverse backgrounds is incredibly important, because it offers really, really deep and extensive perspectives that we are not all able to think of because we are people. We're not an encyclopedia. I guess that's my 2 cents on that.
Connects back to individualism, right? Like if I'm the only person sitting in, or like we have one perspective in the casting room, then that means that we have one perspective in the casting room. What else do we think?
Well, go ahead.
No, please.
So for me, when I'm casting, or when I'm hiring an actor, when I'm hiring an illustrator, when I'm hiring whomever I'm hiring, I try to make sure that it's whomever I'm hiring is for that role, for that job, and who is the marginalized voice in whatever I'm creating that needs to be lifted up. So how can I make sure that my money is going to somebody? And some things are free. I understand not everybody's roles are paid, but how can I make sure that I'm putting my wallet where my mouth is? And let me make sure that I'm fostering this kind of director, producer, creator, facilitator role of giving people roles that usually aren't given roles to, or people who usually are overlooked for because there's more illustrators out there who are white male, or there are more X, Y, and Z. Well, let me hunt down other people, because I know they're out there who are not the white supremacy, the white male. Let me find these characters. So it's a lot of legwork in casting, I think, to really make sure that, again, there's that word authentic, but also that I am doing something with my quote unquote power, that I'm being able to really give back to whomever would be marginalized, or whoever would be in that production. If it's an ensemble production, make sure, like, my play that I had in the Fringe was an ensemble Black women cast, and I wanted to bring on a Black woman producer, hire a Black woman producer for that, for the show. I could have hired many other producers, but I wanted to make sure that it was an authentic job that I gave to, that would be great for this, ensemble piece. And many other things that I, work on. I always make sure that I want to facilitate that kind of area. Like Kevin was saying, that now I know in our diversity scholarships, if you're applying, you have, or no, not even our diversity scholarships, it's with our sponsored awards. You have to have diverse people in your sponsored awards who are also looking at these plays. So it's not just a party of one, or it's not just a party of white, or it's not just a party of, trying to break these constants that have been around for a while. So yeah, I think it's just really taking a good hard look at what is missing. What am I speaking about? Who can I bring onto my team that's going to add to the voice that I'm trying to promote, or the voice that's in here that's not being promoted, and really bolstering your production that way.
Yeah. Natasha, I love what you said about casting authentically, because as a mixed Black person, like I look Black, I look white, I look Hispanic, I look Puerto Rican, like I look all of these different cultural, racial, ethnic backgrounds. And I know from my experience that I've had an agent that was like, you go out for Latinx, like there's this role. And I get it. And like they're speaking Spanish, or their mom is speaking Spanish. And that's not authentic for you to put me in that role. And realizing that like just because somebody looks a certain way doesn't mean that that is really the right role for them, or the right person to be inside of that role. You know, like I get put out for Black and white roles, mostly Black and mixed roles, really. And there are scripts that I'll look at and I'm like, you know what, this role isn't for me, because it's reading more from a monoracial experience. And I don't know that I feel comfortable sitting myself in this role, you know. And so having those kinds of conversations and thoughts too, you know, is how's that perspective being served by the people you're casting. Royce, do you have anything you'd like to add to this conversation on the stuff, or you feel?
No, I mean, 'cause I think a lot of all of this kind of runs hand in hand, you know, like casting, the content, and yeah, and then just like the experiences of, you know, of who you're casting. Yeah, because and a lot, I like the point that was brought up by Camila about colorism too, like, because that's a big thing. Like, so even what was it, West Side Story? I was like, hey, where are the Afro Latinos? Where are the, you know, where's everybody that's, you know, that's brown, even just brown skinned? Like, that's a thing. Like, where you, like, you know, it should be, if you're going to be representative, don't have acid, basically.
Yeah, I love that. Don't half-ass it. That's actually what we're gonna, I think, write that in your notes. If you're taking notes, you can't half-ass this work. You really gotta, you do it, and your work is better for it, you know, because you're looking, like we're talking about how much work goes in ahead of casting to make these decisions. That is work that you're spending inside of your script, analyzing it, not just for its needs, but also for the story, if it's through lines, the character arcs. And really, it just makes better theater when you start to look at these things, because we're analyzing our culture and what our needs are on the, you know, the other side of it, where it's like, okay, now we have an audience, and that audience is going to have a better experience when you're more authentic to the story. Cool. And this one can be pretty quick. Is there any resources y'all have as far as like, you know, casting calls, you know, boards, sites, social media, you know, Actors Access, any language or anything that you use to sort of open things up and be better about casting? I don't know, that was a horrible phrase of sentence, but
I mean, for me, I went through Backstage, and I went through UCLA, USC, Schools of Acting, and I know there's one I'm forgetting. It might have been Actors Access.
Playbill's a great resource. I feel like a lot of I'll speak from my community of friends. They're always like, how do you find postings to do theater around the country? And many of us don't know that Playbill is like a drop down menu away from finding something, not only like performer wise, but like, excuse me, sorry, I'm like an LA girl. Anytime it rains, I'm like, oh no, I'm dying, I'm melting, I'm made of sugar. Really. It's incredibly embarrassing. But yeah, it's not only performer based, but if you want to, you know, get your hands dirty with assistant directing and all these things, Playbill is a really wonderful resource, I would say. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would say the same thing, like between, you know, using like your own, like, yeah, so you have your own, like your friend community, like the fringe community is a great place to post, because, you know, there is a lot more diversity than there used to be. And, you know, the people are out there, you know, it's one of those things, like, just ask. Like, there's not really an excuse to say like, hey, I don't know where to find the brown people. I don't know where to find people that are queer. I don't know, like, like, you know, it's like, look around, we're in Los Angeles, one of the most diverse cities in the country. So it's, you know, it's not tough, but like, say if you aren't in those communities, you know, I can understand where it might be like, hey, I don't want to just ask, maybe like, hey, I'm new to the area, I'm not from here, you know, no one, you're not just gonna be like, hey, where are these people at? Like, you know, you're not just gonna ask that. So like, a lot of it is just like, you know, going to these meetings, going to the fringe, like the open houses, the happy hours, all that sort of thing, where then you can meet people, like, and then it's like, hey, I need to cast these types of roles. Yeah, ask around the community. That's kind of like the point of these things, for just to get resources and find out where, like, recommendations, word of mouth. I mean, a lot of that goes a long way.
Yeah. And I think, for a great example is like Actors Access is free to post on. And there are thousands and thousands of actors who are looking for roles. And many of us have it like, so it's delineated by like types for us. And if it says mixed race, black, white skin, whatever, I get a notification that says, hey, there's a role open for you. And so these resources, I mean, we have the internet, and there is at this point no excuse not to even find it, because they're out there. We're here. It's Los Angeles, like Roy said. So check it out. Let's talk next about community. And I think this one's really important because it becomes interpersonal. And we're talking about casting, and then what you have your awesome cast that represents your story and is authentic and has a diversity to it, so that we are sharing the legitimate experience, for instance, of living in Los Angeles, right? Like the truth is, we're not really, like, Los Angeles isn't predominantly white at all. It's actually predominantly Hispanic, Black, and BIPOC and AAPI. So to consider that when you're casting is important. If you want to represent our actual communities, the United States is not really predominantly white anymore, like at all. And so when you invite all of us into your communities, how do you be anti-racist? What does that look like? I guess just like what if you could say like one sentence, and I know this is really weird, we'll get into a little bit more, but like for you, like what is something that makes the space comfortable for you to join, And like I can start. I think like people, I like to be in a space where people don't say the mixed guy over there, or yeah, he's the Black person, or just using racially based or visual based descriptors that have to do with person's ethnic race, right? Like that bothers me. I don't like hearing that. I'd be like, yeah, the guy with the black shirt with the skull on it, he's standing over there, right? Like that kind of descriptor.
I think I'm a little confused on the question.
Yeah, so like what is what does an anti-racism space look like to you? Right? It's kind of like a broad question to get into a larger question. So I try to simplify it. Maybe by doing so, I made it more complicated. But like how does a space feel, like a good space feel for you when you're in the community of theater?
For me, it's a diverse, right? Where I grew up in Chicago was very, very diverse. And so it's just what I was around was just like the United Nations. And I really gravitate towards that. And I notice when I look around that a lot of my friends are diverse. And I don't know if that's, from Chicago or just myself. And I think for me, being a chameleon, you don't know what I am. I look white passing, but I'm not, white. I think being able to be a chameleon and not have anybody, like Kevin said, be like, oh, that white girl. I mean, I've never really had that happen except for with white people, but not about me. Just being able to be in a place like, here's a perfect example, is there was a Lunar New Year festival that happened at the Bradbury Building down in LA, and I went with a bunch of my girlfriends, my crew, and they're all different Asian descents. And they were like, this is so cool to be at this event that like everybody kind of looks like us. And then Natasha, and then I felt like this is so great because of all these diverse people, and like everybody here is super diverse, all different. But to me, it just felt diverse. I felt so welcome. I felt so at peace, and it was just really safe. It was a really safe space. And I noticed that, if I go to a party or I go to a play or I go to a concert and I look around and I notice the diversity in a place and the welcome of diversity and the mix of friends, you know, who's showing up with who. And like Kevin said, LA, I think there's 400 languages in LA. It's the second most diverse place after the Bay Area, Los Angeles. So LA itself, you know, it's still very much like Chicago, which is there's a lot of segregation in different areas. But if you go to a show, you go to a Dodgers game, you go out, you notice that there's a lot of diversity, but where is the community in that? And so I think that's something that Fringe definitely still a little bit struggles with, and that's why these conversations are important, especially when it comes to, you know, if I go to one of the Fringe events and, you know, I just kind of check it out, like who's with who's everybody getting along? Is there, you know, what's the diversity look like? So that for me is, you know, diverse, not just with skin color, but also faith, also with LBGT, also with, you know, just, I hate to say the word disability. I know that disability is a thing, but ableism, how about that? With the lack of ableism, and then diverse, just diversity. You can really feel the difference.
Yeah, I echo that. I think a space that is diverse and recognizes its success stems from its anti-racism is important. Not just a space that is like, we're not racist. Mm-hmm. It's that we are better, are not better as like people and morally, because, well, yeah, you know, but we are our product, whatever product we're selling, be it a grocery store I'm talking about or a theater production. We are the things we give is better because our foundation is rooted in anti-racist work. I think a community that feels safe to me is anti-racist. It's also, like Natasha said, anti-homophobia. You know, it is a space that lets queer people and queered people thrive. It is a space that has no room for patriarchy. It is, I'm gonna use this word, it is anarchist in a way that does not, holds no space for any hierarchy that makes no sense. You know, there are hierarchies that make sense, like a playwright, a director, a producer, the actors, the crew. You know, those are hierarchies that are function well, are good, but is anarchist in a way that makes no room for a hierarchy based on race or sex or gender or ability, or, you know, and holds its privileged members in the community accountable, I think. And they're held accountable with tenderness, but with a strong hand. You know, I think that is beautiful and expected, I would say.
I love the accountability part. I think that's a huge thing for me too.
Yeah, and it's like just piggybacking off of what Natasha and Camila said. I mean, it's just being in a space where you're comfortable in your own skin, where you're not, you know, you're not second guessing what people are saying. There's no, you know, you're not thinking like, okay, was that a microaggression? Like, or, oh, that was weird, or, you know, like that, like you don't have that fear of that, because like no one is doing that. Like everyone's there for like the same thing. We're all looking at each other like, oh, okay, yeah, we're all just, you know, humans. That's it. Like we have more in common that we do not. So I mean, that's essentially what, you know, we're all striving for, is kind of being like, hey, it's like the global community. Like, sure, you know, we maybe like have slight differences, but at its core, you know, we're all the same. So like, I mean, that's really what it is. Because like when you're in a space and not feel othered, not feel like, oh, I'm the different one. That's what that to me is what an anti-racist space looks like. Is say, even if, okay, yeah, I mean, you know, in the minority of people in our room, where it's like, okay, maybe like a handful of people of color, even those that are not of color, they're not treating anything any differently. So because even if it's that feels comfortable, we're saying, oh, okay, hey, I'm just me, and no one else cares about anything else. Like that's what you strive for. Doesn't always happen, and you know, I feel like the work one, things like that may never be done, but you can't give up on it. You can't stop just because of that. Like, you just have to keep going until, like, the more people that are thinking like that, then okay, then it's the majority of people that are anti-racist and that are, like, welcoming and, more community minded.
Yeah. I find, and I kind of touched on it at the top. I like space. I like what you said, like the othering, like a space where you don't feel othered, and like comments on characteristics of people that are like traditionally associated with a cultural ethnic group. Like, I kind of can't stand it when I go into a space and people are like commenting specifically about like the Black features on a person. I was at a festival. I brought Abortion Weekend, which was a phenomenal show, to a college theater festival last week, and everybody was coming up to both me and them talking about our hair and how amazing their hair is, and being like, it's so beautiful, and so this, you're radiant. And like, there comes a point where it's like, okay, thank you, but like, you're the sixth person to come and single my guests out for the thing that makes them different, right? Instead of talking about how intelligent they are, talking about how wonderful their show was, you're talking about their physical characteristics. And so having a space where you have that thought, like, wow, their hair is amazing, instead of calling out the one thing that makes them different, be like, you look incredible. Like, I love the clothes that you have on. I love your style, right? Like, can be less harmful than something else. And then not focusing on people's physical characteristics I think is extremely important in anti-racist spaces.
I would say, like, especially if that's the only thing you comment on. It's like, because to me, if someone says like, oh, I love your hair, it's like, okay, thanks, and then they're talking about other things, like, okay, then a compliment is just a compliment. But if so I think, like, in that sense, we have to not necessarily discount that,
Mm.
but and accept that, like, hey, this is just how some people talk. But if that's, like, that's not the only reason, then it's fine. Like, like, yeah, like every time I see Natasha, it's like, oh, I love this, or like, hey, I love what you did your hair, this, that, and the other. Like, yeah, I also still know she's more than that. Talk about those things, but like, I guess I wouldn't want to give the idea for anyone watching or listening that, hey, don't compliment people, or like, don't tell them like, hey, your hair looks great, or like this. There's a line between flattery and fetishization. When you're fetishizing, that's when you've crossed the line. If you're just being complimentary, then that's another thing entirely.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to address that there is a difference between that.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, right? Because it's like, how do you compliment and then move on versus like compliment and obsess over, right? And I think thank you for clarifying, because that is true. Like, I love compliments too. Tell me my hair looks amazing. Don't obsess over it. Or yeah, that's great. Let's see.
Without permission.
Say it again.
I said, or touch it without permission.
Yeah, and that's right, because that no, please.
Yeah.
What practices do you use to maintain anti-racism inside of your spaces? So like any community rules, or like, yeah, and it could be anything, the people that you bring into the room.
I think, other than instilling diversity in these communities, if I'm producing a work that's that holds space for a group that I'm not a part of, then, and I'm producing it, then it is my job to, as I say, wipe my own ass and do research and outreach to those communities, because I don't know, I could, intake a lot of content, but if I'm not reaching out to these communities for their work, their labor and their input and their experiences, then the work that I'm going to be producing is at best lazy, incoherent, and boring, and at worst dangerous and cruel and humiliating. And the line between that is very slim, I find,
Mm-hmm. Oh no.
Wait,
is that the only one?
I'm back. Can you hear me?
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Yeah, so sorry. I guess, yeah, the line between those two is very difficult. So if, you know, we want to produce incredibly diverse and anti-racist work, but very, very few of us in the world are a part of every single marginalized community, very few of us. And so the research does not only mean opening a book, although I encourage everyone to do so, if they have access to a library or a educational institution, but it's also primary accounts, like we have to be journalists at some point. I think that is a really, I don't know, useful tool, I guess I would say.
Yeah. I love that you said we have to be journalists. I think it's really intelligent because we're telling stories, and so understanding the communities that we invite into our groups through engagement with the community itself, within permission too, right? Because you can't just come in and like we're talking about with hair, obsess over a culture, because then that can start to become an aggression of its own, so authentically engaging and learning.
Yeah.
And encouraging your cast members to do the same, please.
Yeah, I would say too, like within communities, calling things out when they happen and correcting. So it's oh, hey, like we don't do that here, or hey, like this isn't how you would say that, or pulling someone aside, hey, FYI. Whereas like you're not, and doing it just normally in a way like you would correct anything else. Where it's just to let people know that like, hey, these are the rules. This is what you don't do, because then once someone knows like the truth, then they can be held accountable for it. Because okay, they've been told how to act in these spaces. They've been, instructed what's acceptable, what's not. Because we're human, people make mistakes. And like, you have to take the opportunity to learn from those mistakes and be receptive to it. Because then that's the other thing, if you're not receptive to the mistakes, then you shouldn't be in that community.
I love that.
Yeah, and I think it also goes back to, the golden rule, which is don't treat people the way that you'd want to be treated. Would you want someone to call you out for X, Y, and Z? How would you feel if someone were to say a microaggression against you? It's just to really have some forethought of what you're bringing, what kind of energy you're bringing to a space, what kind of energy you want from that space, and what you can add to that space. So it's kind of threefold. I feel like when it comes to anti-racist spaces, that I particularly try to be very cognizant, and I still make mistakes. I'm not going to be able to solve racism, like Kevin said at the top of this, panel today. But to come in knowing that I'm going into a place where everyone has their own experiences of whatever it might be in their life. My experiences are different than another person's experience. And how can I be receptive through listening, through asking questions, through body language, through answering questions? How can I be a part of a conversation? How can I ask what I'm curious about? How can I show vulnerability and accept vulnerability? And how can I just be kind? And I feel like that'll take you a long way in life, not just with anti-racism behavior, but also just being a good person, being a good human.
Yeah, I think I love all of this, just like accountability and grace, right, with each other as we sort of go through a space and learn. Because the other part, a component is that not all, like if you have a space that is, I hate words, I don't know, imbued. There's lots of BIPOC people inside of the space, right? And it's a diverse, wonderful space. You're in this group and you're in this space, and then you go and work in another space. The two spaces aren't the same, and they might have different rules, and so or different desires for their space, right? And so being authentic in your moving into a new space. Like I do this even, right? Where like I have different groups of friends that are predominantly BIPOC, and this group over here is super, super one way. I'm not going to go into detail. And this group over here has a different set of beliefs and standards, right? And so knowing where you are and being able to respect the group that you're inside of, so that way you're creating that wonderful community, you know. Yeah, I think it's fantastic. The next thing I'd like to ask is a bit of a, you know, it's, and feel free to pass on this. Has there ever been a space that you've been in where there's been a mistake and something happened and there was an incident, or somebody needed to be called in, or even like you made a mistake? And how did you go about managing your response to that?
Well, I know for me, when I first started writing, I always let my mom, I used to really always let my mom read everything that I wrote. My mom's Black. And I remember I had a crackhead and it was a woman. And my mom told me, what is this? You know, why do you have a Black woman? Why do they always have to be crackheads? She was pretty upset with me. And it was a real lesson. And I was, you know, embarrassed, and it sticks with me a lot. And you know, that's my mom, and I didn't want to insult my mom, and I didn't want to insult Black women. I didn't want. I thought she was going to think the script was great, but it was like, woof! It was a big learning lesson for me. And she was, you know, disappointed in me, and yeah, and you know, it's not something that you can just be. Your mom's kind of unconditional, and I know it's different than like a friend group or something like that, but it really sticks with me. And it's definitely how I approach, you know, make sure when I'm writing characters that I really think them out. Yeah, so that's a big one for me.
Yeah, I'll share. One time I wrote a play about like an extension of like the oppressive nature of the foster care system, and there was violence on Black bodies, and I had put that there's violence in the play and in the trigger warnings and everything, and I didn't elaborate on the nature of it. And I had some people come up to me and be like, hey, like I had to tune out because I didn't expect that was in the play. And it was a huge lesson for me to go like, okay, cool. It's not enough just to say mature content and violence, but delineating, hey, what is the nature of it? Because there's a difference between violence on Black bodies and just violence in general. And so I thank them for expressing it to me. And from there on out, when I do that play, I make sure that it's clear what the content is about. Anyone else like to? You can pass if you want to. We'll move on.
Go for it.
Oh, okay.
I just wanted to. Yeah, sorry.
I was gonna say, like, as far as definitely mistakes that I've seen, because in my own theater community, like the comedy community, theater community that I'm part of, you know, we had a town hall and someone asked, like, all right, yeah, they were talking about, you know, inclusive casting and finding people. Was like, well, what if we just, you know, like had everyone kind of put their names on a list that we could share, so we could easily, you know, and we can, you know, like reach out to people from that. And it was like, and we pretty much had to stop them. It was like, okay, yeah, first of all, no good thing happens from putting brown people's names on a list for white people, just historically. And then also it's like, yeah, I get the sentiment, like, hey, you want to, you know how to find people, but it's like, we're not wising up to, you know, the people of color to do the work for you. Like that's where you need to go out and do the work. And is it going to different shows? Is it, you know, expanding your friend group? Is it seeing other people like, oh, I like that was a good show, let me go up to them afterwards, like, hey, can I book you on something? It's just it works same thing in a theater community. Like you see a play and there's this, you know, just wonderful actor that you see up there, and you know, asking her like, hey, what's your availability, can I send you a script? Like, it's just talking to people. Like that's it. Just like you talk to anyone else. Like casting people of color is no different than casting white people. Like, how do you do that? Oh, yeah, and I'll talk to them. So yeah.
I love what you
Mm.
said there that we haven't even really like explicitly said. I think we've been saying it, but go see BIPOC shows. If you have a show, like if you haven't seen a double API show in an entire year and you're looking to cast somebody, well, you know where you can find them is by engaging in the work that they're already doing, learning about their perspective by engaging with the work, you know, and then expanding your network. I think that's brilliant, Royce.
This is a mistake that I hope I don't have to continue grappling with for long, but I'm in the very early stages of my career. And oftentimes the auditions I get seem very promising and fruitful because of the context that it brings, the contact, like the people, like the higher ups that it brings. But oftentimes it's an audition for an incredibly racist role, you know, a Latina who is promiscuous, and the script offers no true understanding why she has been sexualized, or a maid who is just a maid and maybe speaks some Spanish, you know. And this is a lot in TV and film. I've been really blessed to play really complicated and three-dimensional characters within, you know, playing a Latina in theater. But it is difficult. I find it so difficult for people my age to stand up to a really prominent casting director or prominent manager and saying like, this is racist, and being met with the sort of apathy and like, well, that's the way things are, and if you want things to change, then you better take these racist reductive roles until you're at the top, and then you can change things from there. And if I don't agree with that, then I'm called an idealist or a silly little woman, you know. And I have not yet found the best way to stand up for myself in a way that is not filled with so much guilt, you know. I don't quite know yet how to do that. And I guess if any young artist is listening or will listen to this, it's so hard and humiliating being sent auditions and scripts that are bad, but also offer a narrative that does real harm to people I love, the people that raised me and the communities I come from have celebrated me. And I'm swinging wide, but we are told that there is only one kind of success with being an actor, you know, and that's kind of the success story that we are sold from a very young age, and that the only way to get to that spot is to, you know, walk on other people's shoulders, you know, like walk over people, and I refuse that, and I condemn that belief, you know, vocally. But when I'm handed a script or an opportunity to meet new people that could sort of get my career moving or accelerate my career, but the script is awful and harmful, I'm at a crossroads every time, and
Yeah.
I don't know.
No, that's really important, right? Because how do we not do that? I think that's the important component. And one of the things about anti-racism is that competition, which is talking about having to walk over people or sacrifice pieces of yourself for something else. And so, you know, when we're talking about people, when you're casting, you have and producing, you have explicit power over people. You don't have power over anybody, but the people that you have power over the people that you choose to bring in. You have power over the piece of work that you're presenting to somebody to step into that role, right? And so how can you be open to somebody saying, hey, I'm offended by this role? Like, I should be able to do that because I've had the same thing where I read this role and I'm like, this guy's a womanizing jerk, and you're making him explicitly Black or mixed, right? And I'm like, why is this character being written this way with the delineation towards this, you know? And I think it's important to
Yeah,
be open to feedback and
yeah, and
not
I'm
defensive.
also I think I'm also interested, you know, if you're going to cast me as excuse my language, as the whore or as the maid, then, which is fine. I'm not saying, here's the thing. I'm going to speak solely from a Latina perspective. Sometimes we are maids, you know what I mean? And that's fine. and sometimes we're promiscuous. Sometimes we like sex. I'm one of those people. I like sex. That's fine. That is a true story. We're not, there's this kind of notion of the model immigrant, of this like to sort of have rights and be recognized as a person in the US. If you're a person of color, you have to be a straight A student. You have to have never done drugs or alcohol, never have sex, just a ridiculous kind of expectation. There are members in our community who have done bad things. We have all done bad things, and those stories are interesting, sure. And a villain of color is interesting because there are bad people of color, and that is just the truth. And that's interesting. Write about that. That's incredibly interesting. But they're often written so racistly and so lazily that it's like, oh my gosh, like I can't sink my teeth into a really meaty, gritty, like harsh, horrible role without like having to sort of sell out my entire community because you can't write, you know what I mean? Because suddenly when it comes to writing people of color, you're like, the ABCs just are lost from your mind. That is absolutely incredible to me.
Yeah. I think a great example of that, and I actually think they did a great job, but in that Obi-Wan show, the writing of it, I loved what Ingram brought to the role, but I think there was stuff peppered in there that they could have gone even deeper and allowed that character to have more depth, right? And I think that if you're going to write a villain character and you're going to cast them POC, make sure that they have that there's depth to the role, right? And if there isn't, be open to receiving feedback and making changes, right? Because theater is alive and we can do anything, right? Anything's possible. Let's move on to our next question. And then I'm going to step out for like 5 seconds, and I'll be right back. I have a small bladder, and I'm very sorry. I have to stay hydrated. I've been traveling all week. When working in anti-racism communities, this is a great one. What are the positive effects that you see when you have all of these wonderful things that we're talking about implemented, and you're making sure that everybody feels welcome and amazed and people are open to receiving feedback, and there's not this like, sense of power and it's equal? What do you notice that changes?
Well, I think the quality of a show, of the production, of the effect of the cast, how happy people are to talk about it. I mean, you can really feel if someone's like Camille just said, if someone's been tokenized or if they've been stereotyped. It trickles down through the whole entire production. There's a real, again, that word authentic authentic feel of a really great show that cannot be replaced when you really do your work. And like Camilla said, being a journalist, like, I had just expressed early in my career, learning that not to stereotype, learning that to do my work, to not just be a part of that white supremacist line of thinking. You really do see a great quality in real production with real ideas that have been fleshed out in a way that really shows the diversity and the use of diversity, like Kevin just mentioned with some Star Wars thing. The person who, I don't know, but the person who was supposed to be is a person of color, they could have gone deeper. Well, you always have that opportunity. It really starts with the creation. And I know, as speaking as a writer, that writing is not something that's just one and done. I mean, yeah, there's a puke draft, but man, that rewrite is really where you have the ability to really lean into your characters and really bring out the best, go for that deep dive, really find out who these people are. We are not monoliths. We are complex people. If you're a person of color, it does not just define you. That's just one of many, 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 many things that you are. You are smart. You have background. You have history. You have wants and needs and dreams and goals. And so that really comes through when you're being anti-racist in your production. That means that you're seeing everything. You're seeing every single element, from a fingernail all the way to what the entire show, what the theme is. So yeah, that's basically my.
Yeah, and we haven't even talked about intersectionality, and that's a whole other big thing. And like, you know, it comes to like everybody feeling and supporting each other in all of their individual things, like celebrating each other for every component that we are. Like, that's what I love when I'm in those spaces, is I see someone else comes in, like a queer person comes in, and then they're celebrated for that. And then somebody who is religious comes in and they're celebrated for that, and our diverse perspectives. So I think it's just remarkable. Royce, I see you.
Yeah, so I think a lot one of the benefits mostly is just like, you know, when everyone just, you know, feels seen. And then when, say, if you're watching a show where like clearly they were following this, and people, it's important for people to see themselves on stage, or to be able to, you know, hear a story and be able to relate to it, even if they're not from that background, you know, whereas you can watch like, oh, you might learn something like, oh, I get it now, or I see that perspective. Like, I understand. Like, that's, you know, that's the benefit of it, because it allows you to, just to learn and just, you know, experience something new, like to go outside of your own comfort level, or your own comfort bubble, honestly. And that's really what it's all about, whereas because everyone deserves to be able to be comfortable in a space, you know, no matter what.
Love. Camila, I know you've been a part of spaces that are that are wonderful and diverse and amazing.
Oh yeah, of course. I guess a lower stakes item I might add is there's nothing like finding the humor you were raised with in the professional spaces that you're working with. If I'm in like all Latinx, South American immigrant play, the humor, the quickness, the wittiness of that reminds me of my father, of my grandma, it's jarring and makes me feel at home. And same when I'm with a group of my queer friends, are huge, just like the biting kind of like, it is so homey. And I love to laugh, obviously, when I'm creating and engaging in a space where it's just so yeah, it feels at home in the best and challenging way. And I love that. I guess I'm offering a lower stakes kind of other than it being absolutely life-changing and affirming, to be in a diverse space. I love humor from communities of color. There's really nothing like it.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that like when you have these spaces, it also removes tension, right? Like there's racism and phobia isms. It creates tension in your community. When one person is feeling unwelcome, it permeates through your entire organization. And so this like laughter that you're talking about, and this feeling seen that you're talking about, and the authenticity and the permission, and nobody needs permission to be authentic, but there is a sense of permission that happens, right? Because people can have a culture where you don't have permission to be authentic. So when you have those things, it is what everybody imagines the theater is when they think of it in high school. Like it's that high school production that you're in, where everyone's just friends and buddies, or hopefully not everybody has those experiences, right? And that's part of the problem. That's why we're having this conversation. But it's like family. It's joy, happiness, and dare I add also, you know, from a capitalist perspective, it's also more lucrative because you are representing more people, which means that you're expanding your audience, which means more people come to your show. Because I, for one, am a little bit tired, and you know, hopefully Fringe doesn't hurt me for saying this, but like, I don't want to go see a show of all, and they never would. Fringe is amazing and the most supportive organization I've ever worked for, in every capacity. And like, I'm tired of seeing all white casts, because I'm like, what perspectives are being given here? Unless it's mandatory to like talk about an issue within that community, or we're talking about Ohio, right? Like that is something that's not welcoming to me personally, you know. So when I see a diverse cast, it makes me happy because I see myself. Camila, was that a hand raise?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that there is a Native American playwright, Larissa Fasthorse, who wrote a play called The Thanksgiving Play, and it's an all-white cast. And it's the reason for an all-white cast also stems from like a lack of
the arts being inaccessible to a lot of communities of color, specifically Indigenous communities, although I'm not a part of an Indigenous community. Those are her words. But it is an all-white cast, and that's a kind of play that was just all of the cast being white was necessary in its kind of like just lack of awareness of what they were saying. Not the cast themselves, but the story was about, like a group of white people not really knowing how to teach Thanksgiving. It's, you know what I mean, or like how to approach Thanksgiving. And it's a great play, and I think that's that kind of all white cast is really interesting, but I agree with you. I think like seeing an all white cast in a play that's like set in Brooklyn, that's crazy.
Yeah, that doesn't need to be. I was
That's crazy. But
one of
you
my-
like you throw a rock in Brooklyn, you're hitting a brown person. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know what you're that's crazy,
or in LA, right? Because we live in LA, we kind of touched on
Yeah,
that.
same with LA. Like that's yeah. Yeah.
I saw a show a couple of days ago. It was a stage reading of this play that took place in like Pacific Northwest, and it was an all-white cast, but they were talking about issues that this region of the country has to deal with poverty and meth addiction and these really impactful things. And there was no problem with it. And because I understood where I was. And it comes back to as well, like intentional casting. When you are casting a person of color, sometimes it is required for that person to be a person of color, right? And you want to make sure that you're attributing that to the sense and to the work that you've been doing leading into the production. I love that, Camila. Thank you for sharing that, because it's so good when you see something that's authentic for what it is, right? And the work that's done prior. Let's see. So we've talked a lot about pretty much everything there is on our list, So I kind of want to touch on content specifically, which we've already been discussing, because as everybody here has acknowledged, all of these things are connected as you start to go through the work of, from ideation to casting to content to audience and presentation. But what are some like hard no's as producers that you would say are like final within a cast, such as or in your production, doing blackface, yellowface, cultural appropriation, not doing research, anything that you would add?
I think if you ask a friend, if you're like writing a script and you ask a friend of yours like to read it, and then they come to you and you send it out to multiple people, and one of them comes back to you and says, hey, this is offensive to a certain community, and your retaliation to that is like, well, that's weird because I sent it to 100 people and none of them said that. That kind of defensiveness and stubbornness, I think, needs to be examined. I've seen a lot of people who sent me scripts and I'm like, well, this is offensive. And they're like, yeah, but I sent it to my friend Jimmy and he wasn't offended by this. And it's like, okay, well, first of all, Jimmy can shut up, but also like I guess just accepting that, some of the work that is going to be pitched is going to be offensive. And then you have to be an adult and decide if it's worth making, if it's worth offending and hurting communities, and if it is worth to you to do that, then that's a bigger issue, that's a totally bigger issue, I would say.
Yeah.
Hard no for me is a very hard no for me is if there's microaggressions within the cast. If there's any kind of issues that are being raised with the cast where there's any kind of belittling, any kind of negative speech, any kind of marginalization, I want to know that stuff immediately. It's very important to me that I sit with each actor individually and have a conversation with them about the role, about the production as a whole, about their goals in life, where they came from, their background. Just have a conversation, really let them open up to me, because maybe there's something within that character I didn't see. I really do believe in the trickle-down theory of productions, that it all comes from the person who's the creator, the director, whomever, that if they do not have a safe space and conversation and a dialogue with their cast and not treat everyone as an equal, as a team, then you will have problems. And it's also with the foundation as well. The foundation is that this is a safe space. Your voice is welcome here. I was working on a show that one of the actors had a issue with saying a particular line, and the producer and I were like, we really appreciate you telling us this, and we will remove that. You know, it wasn't crucial, but we removed the line. We would much rather hear them than have them struggle, than have them act out in a way towards other people, act out towards us, have any kind of regret. It's just a hard no for me is any kind of strife. If the cast feels bad, then it's going to be a bad production. If the producer feels bad, it's going to be a bad production. If someone talks poorly about one of the team, because it is a team, it's going to be a bad production. So that's a hard no for me.
Yeah, I love that. We're talking about the leadership, right? The strong, empathetic, open-minded leadership. That's my big thing too.
Yeah, my big no would just be, any kind of like just blatant disrespect to people. So just believing, just respecting each other, treat others how you want to be treated. And really it's that simple. It's kind of like the general theater rule of like, hey, like, don't be a dick. Like that's it's that simple.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's something too, like calling out what I've noticed in the Los Angeles theater community and abroad, all communities really, is that these conversations really aren't that isolated, right? Like I feel like a lot of the information that we're talking about is pretty well documented and accessible in the media, on news, in television, podcasts, YouTube. It's in music. It's in our music that we all listen to, right? And there's a level of like a blatant disregard to the reality of it, and these things, the fact that these things still happen inside of spaces when. At this point, especially if you live in Los Angeles, there's really no excuse to even continue some of these practices that we've discussed, because it is apparent. We know that saying, for instance, stating that you as a white person that you have a preference towards a specific race to a person of that race, like we know that that's not okay. That's a microaggression, and yet that those things still happen. Right. And we have issues in our community that come up that we deal with every year, where it is, we know that we're not supposed to do these things, yet we do them. And it's about that treating people how they want to be treated. It's about letting go of, whatever power or thing it is that makes you or somebody do those things, and this is a part of that sensitive conversation where it's just like, be kind, right? Don't do these things because it makes you a jerk. So don't be a jerk. Right. And read, we have put into the chat, the characteristics of white supremacy. Look at them, engage with them. Because when you do that, you have better interactions with other people, so wonderful, everyone. I think, we've really talked about everything. I'd like to kind of touch on personally a little bit, like what, blackface and yellowface, just a little bit, or any sort of, at faces, right? The concept of portraying a character outside of your ethnic group, it looks different than it used to. And I think acknowledging that as we move into this new era of theater and film and television as well, where, for instance, I have no problem, and we'll use a personal example. I have no problem playing a Black role, so long as that role is written in a way that gives me access to that role, because Black people, our communities come with many different shades, hues, personalities, etc. But I'm not gonna, if somebody were to try and like cast me as young Martin Luther King, I'm gonna say no, because that would then become blackface. I'm not that, right? If it's a fictional character that lives in Brooklyn who is Black and has things going on in his life, right? It's a play, things are happening. That's okay, so long as like there's not pieces of it that would really detach me from what it is. If I am a white person, I am not going to go ahead and play, I don't know, Harriet Tubman, right? You're not going to go portray Harriet Tubman in a production of like a two-hander or a solo show or anything like that. Yeah, and anyone have any kind of context on what that is, like how black faces sort of and the other faces have sort of changed in definition? It's not just about putting on makeup anymore.
Oh yeah, because it can easily. Oh, I'm sorry, Camila.
No, go for it.
Yeah, a lot of it sometimes it could be like in accents and dialects, like that. Like that's a thing for sure. Different there are whole things with outside of like theater, like with like artists using a whole lot of bronzer to make them think that people think they're ethnic, but no, they're not. It's like that sort of thing, because and also even just kind of like lived experiences. Like there is one thing if like, hey, this is this person's actual authentic lived experience, like, all right, cool. But then it's like I'll use an example, the controversy over like Aquafina or Nora, basically speaking in a black accent half the time, except when she's cast in other things. And of course, the Black community had a big problem with that. So it's inauthenticity is really kind of like what comes to issue there. And kind of like what you were saying, Kevin, it's like yeah, you're not going to play a young Martin Luther King. Their roles. Yeah, I'm not gonna play like this particular type of black person. I'm not gonna play that. Like it's really being authentic. Like if it's kind of one of those things where it's like, if you have to ask, maybe you shouldn't do it, or like ask someone else who may know better than you, and to be like, okay, hey, is this okay? Is this, because sometimes what, you may honestly just not know, and it's always okay to ask a question. That's what people are here for. That's why that exists. Like, because if you don't ask, you'll never know.
Yeah,
I was gonna say, there were some college professors at UCLA that are no longer working there, defending an all-white cast of an August Wilson play, and would prompt, which is so ridiculous, and would prompt these like, but why not? Why could, people are people and stories are stories and all these things, and just vehemently defending these ideas. And I think, like, why? Well, I guess my first question is like, why is there a need for an all-white cast to do August Wilson? But I think it goes deeper than that. It's like, I think people in positions of mass privilege, and white people specifically, have this like intense FOMO, this fear of missing out, a fear like, why can't I be included in this story, as if they haven't been included in all and prioritized in almost all aspects of history, and down to like our education system. We prioritize a white perspective, and it's probably just like being uncomfortable with the fact that this is not a story you would tell. This is not a story that you could do your best work on at, just in, like, the least of terms. Like, you will not do your best work as a white person in an August, like, you know what I mean? Like, in Fences, there's no there's no reason for Meryl Streep to, do it. Speaking of Meryl Streep, she actually did brownface in The Laundromat in 2019. She played a Panamanian woman. She adopted an accent. She tanned her skin. She made her nose larger. She hip padded herself. This is Meryl Streep in 2019. And I bring it up every time I can, because people are like, Meryl Streep's a chameleon. And I'm like, yeah, sometimes in ways that we don't want her to be.
yeah.
So it's stuff like that. I think when it comes to actors darkening themselves or donning an accent or a dialect that makes no real sense to do, it's this kind of like just blind privilege of like, I want to be able to tell all the stories I want to be able to tell, and there's some stories that not everyone can tell.
Yeah.
And the faster we realize that and sit with that in our own private space without subjecting other people of color to deal with our white guilt, then the faster things will get better, I think.
Yeah, I think, and then we'll move into Q&A, but there is a place for like I know white people who grew up in Brooklyn, who grew up in Inglewood, and they do, because they were like surrounded by people of color, they do have slightly different speech patterns, and that's okay to have little bits of that, so long as it's a part of the story, right? It's about that authenticity. Is so long as what you're presenting is authentic, that's what matters. And I love what you guys are saying. It's so good. Any questions from our audience? You can raise your virtual hands. We'll move into a Q&A. Or we'll just keep talking about stuff too. Yeah, thank you, Carly. Is there anything that y'all like, have any burning like things on your chest that you're like, hey, this is something, I think authenticity is a real big part of the conversation we've been having, and like making sure that your stories are authentic to the cultures that are presented, and you're starting with your plays, moving down into, like Gen Z is a really, like, their language is very derivative from people of color, and I think that's something to kind of like how do we honor and respect that,
Mhm.
And respect when we're talking about the plays that will probably start really coming out. There will be components of plays that are driven from the culture of BIPOC people. And it's kind of a bigger concept, but like, how do we honor the cultures where our culture comes from?
Yeah.
Like queer culture, for instance, queer culture borrows a lot from BIPOC culture. And so how do we, in white queer spaces, it has become intrinsically part of queer culture. How do we say yes and honor the culture that it comes from?
I think finding a line between I was going to bring this up as a thing, like finding the line between celebrating the culture and appropriating from that culture. That's where the line has to be found, and people need to recognize when that line has been crossed.
Mhm.
That's been that's been a thing, definitely in queer culture, and in just the people adopting hip-hop culture for instance, which is inherently Black culture, or like say if you're from New York and you're Puerto Rican, it blends. It's almost like you're the same thing, like there's a lot of whereas like, hey, we're all part of that same culture there together because it's like shared experiences. It's another thing. So I remember just personal experience. I knew someone who was white and queer, and would say as a joke, it's like, oh yeah, I have like the soul of a Black woman inside me. I'm like, no, the hell you don't. like don't ever say that. Like it's like, no. Like it's the thing, like if you have not lived that experience, don't pretend like you're a part of that, or don't stop appropriating from that, and the same gestures, the same language, like because it's just ridiculously disrespectful to Black women, and a lot of times they're the ones that are always getting discriminated the most against, or being silenced, or having things taken from them. And then now everyone thinks that, oh, okay, yeah, no, this is just like normal queer culture. Is like, no. Do you know where that started? Do you know where that came from?
Mm-hmm.
No, you don't. So stop.
Yeah.
But again, that's a whole conversation that could go on for weeks. So
Yeah. When I think that it's apparent, like we talked about earlier, we know these things. At this point, it is so pervasively acknowledged, and keyword is acknowledged. That doesn't mean that it's that anything's being done about it, that queer culture is driven from BIPOC culture, right? So with that information that we do have, how do you honor our communities authentically with, because you can still, at a certain point, you can still include it. Look, the teenagers are saying things like, you know, no cap and bussin' and stuff. And it's like, great, love that you love the culture, honor the culture now. You know what I'm saying? Like, if you're gonna do it with respect. Don't be racist, you know. Don't say you have a Black woman inside you, because that's just not authentic.
Yeah. Or like, be Eminem, don't be Miley Cyrus.
Mm.
Great example. Be Eminem, don't be Miley Cyrus or Macklemore.
Yeah. Oh, at least Macklemore realized what he did and was like, I'm not taking that Grammy. Kendrick, this was yours.
Yeah, that's true. Thank you.
I will give him
I just remember that one time that he said, I think it was Macklemore, maybe I'm getting my people confused, but he said he's a rock star, not a rapper. Is that Macklemore?
I don't think
No,
so.
no. That's who's the guy with the teeth?
Post Malone?
Post Malone. Post Malone said that he's a rock
He's
star.
also a
not
hot
rapper.
mess. He's also
Yeah.
a hot mess. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
I think
I
also
love Macklemore actually.
I think non-Black people don't realize a sound when appropriating that language, on top of it being incredibly harmful. But it's like, there's so many instances of AV not even being used correctly, you know, which is, you know, astounding and embarrassing.
Yeah, it looks like we have a question / like affirmation in the chat. It says, thank you all for your great talk today. You've already talked about this, but when people try to cast me in that role, in a role that doesn't reflect my ethnicity, they tell me actors should be able to act any experience, and I don't want to burn any bridge with someone, but I feel I'm not exactly sure how I feel, but I feel bad when that's told. How would we respond to that? You know, I think the question is like, how do you not burn a bridge when somebody asks you to do something that is uncomfortable to you?
Sometimes you have to ask yourself if that is a bridge you want to cross. And that's really hard. That's really hard. You know, I hate Quentin Tarantino. I think his work is dumb. You know, I don't like it. And oftentimes when I say that, I'm met with like, okay, well, if he called you right now, as if he had my number, if he called you right now and offered you a spot in a movie, you're going to say no? And then I'm not saying it's going to be easy to say no, but are you going to feel safe and honored in that space? You think Quentin Tarantino is going to make me feel safe and honor me? And they're not, right? And it's scary to burn a bridge when you're an early, I talked about this, you know, it's scary, but it's also scarier to be in an environment, to get that big first gig, and it is an environment where you are ridiculed, where you are unsafe, where you are not being taken seriously, when you're just a sort of, you know, just a body, you know. And I think I remind myself of that when I have to turn down jobs after I kick and scream and cry, and it's emotional, and it's probably going to be emotional for the rest of our lives. And it's hard. I guess I just want to honor that it's hard. It's hard to say no to problematic work when it offers such a fruitful career. But there's 1,000,001 ways to reach your dreams, and so many of those ways don't involve putting yourself and other people in danger.
And I'd add that when you say no, when you know, there's the old parable, when one door closes, another one's going to open. And I think that that's so true, especially when you start to, and you know, I'm like in my 30s now, which is crazy. So like you can, you know, over time, you start to build these communities that then leads you to meeting other people that have similar values, who are all growing and working together. So, you know, aligning yourself with the community that you believe in will lead to expanding that community to create more opportunity. So yeah, thank you for that wonderful question. And we are out of time. So we are going to go ahead and say goodbye, everybody, and that we love you and thank you for coming. See ya on the other side of the Fringe in person. Come to the
Thank
office
you.
hours. Thank you all. You're
Thank you so
amazing.
much.
Thank you.
Bye.